At my baby shower, my mother-in-law announced the baby wasn't her son's. Look at those features. Everyone stared. I calmly stood up, walked to the cake and cut a slice. You're right, I said, but not the way you think. The moment I walked into my own baby shower, I knew something was wrong. The air felt thick with forced smiles and whispered conversations that stopped the second I entered. Pink balloons swayed from the ceiling like accusations, and the pastel tablecloth couldn't hide the tension crackling beneath the surface. There's our beautiful mama. Ella's voice rang out with theatrical warmth, but her eyes told a different story. My mother-in-law rushed toward me with arms outstretched, her embrace feeling more like a cage than comfort. Over her shoulder, I caught Aria's smirk. Andrew's sister had positioned herself near the gift table like a sentinel guarding secrets. The decorations screamed of Ella's control. Every ribbon, every flower arrangement, every carefully placed photo frame bore her signature touch. This wasn't my celebration, it was her stage. I had asked for simple yellow decorations, neutral and cheerful. Instead, the room exploded in aggressive pink, as if she was already deciding my child's identity before they took their first breath. We picked the most beautiful cake flavor, Penelope chimed in, Andrew's cousin appearing at my elbow with predatory timing. Vanilla with strawberry filling, Ella's favorite. Not mine. Never mine. But I smiled anyway, my hand instinctively moving to my belly where my 7-month-old baby kicked in response to my rising pulse. Before we go on, thank you for being here with me. If you believe in standing up to family bullies, please subscribe. It's free and helps us grow stronger together. Now let's see how this unfolded. The guest list revealed another layer of their manipulation. Ella had invited her bridge club, women I barely knew who studied me with the intensity of forensic investigators. Mrs. Henderson from down the street kept glancing between my face and my stomach, her forehead creased with confusion. Even my own friends seemed outnumbered, scattered among strangers who had no business celebrating my child. Sit here, dear, Ella commanded, guiding me to a throne-like chair decorated with more pink ribbons. We want everyone to get a good look at you. The phrasing sent ice through my veins. Not, see you, but look at you, like I was an exhibit in their twisted museum. Andrew hovered near the kitchen doorway, his phone clutched in his palm like a lifeline. 3 weeks ago he would have been beside me, his hand protective on my shoulder. Now he avoided eye contact, checking his messages with nervous frequency. When I tried to catch his attention, he looked through me as if I were made of glass. The games began with surgical precision. Pin the diaper on the baby became an exercise in anatomical scrutiny. Look how perfectly round her belly is, commented Mrs. Peterson, one of Ella's friends. Almost too perfect, wouldn't you say? The words hung in the air like smoke, and I watched several guests shift uncomfortably. Aria orchestrated the gift opening with military efficiency, her manicured nails clicking against her clipboard as she recorded each present. Oh, how lovely, she cooed over a blue onesie from my college roommate Sarah. Though I wonder if we should exchange it for something more appropriate. Her pause before appropriate felt deliberate, calculated. During the guessing games about my pregnancy cravings and symptoms, I noticed Penelope taking notes. Actual notes. Her pen moved across a small notepad with the dedication of a court reporter. When I asked about it with forced lightness, she laughed too loudly. Just making sure we remember everything for the baby book. The whispers grew bolder as the afternoon progressed. I excused myself to use the restroom and caught fragments of conversation floating from the kitchen. Doesn't look right. Timing seems off. Poor Andrew has no idea. Their voices cut through the thin walls like surgical instruments, precise and devastating. Returning to the living room, I found Ella studying the ultrasound photos I had brought to share. She held one close to her face, squinting with exaggerated concentration. Such an interesting profile, she announced to no one in particular. The nose is so distinctive. Her voice carried across the room like a stone dropped in still water, creating ripples of uncomfortable silence. My own mother sat rigidly on the couch, her usual warmth replaced by defensive tension. She knew something was happening but couldn't identify the threat. Her eyes found mine across the room, and I saw her confusion mixed with protective anger. But I shook my head almost imperceptibly. Not yet. The cake cutting approached like an execution. Ella positioned herself beside the dessert table, her smile sharpening with each passing minute. The pink frosting roses seemed to mock me, their artificial perfection matching the false celebration surrounding my unborn child. "Before we cut the cake," Ella announced, her voice suddenly commanding the room's attention, "I think we should take a moment to really look at our guest of honor." Her emphasis on look made my skin crawl. Every head turned toward me and I felt the weight of their collective gaze like physical pressure. I remained seated in my decorated throne, my hands folded over my belly, watching my mother-in-law's performance with detached fascination. She was about to make her move, the one I had been preparing for since I discovered their plan 3 weeks ago. The room held its breath and I held mine, ready for the moment that would change everything. The cake knife gleamed in Ella's hand like a promise of things to come. 3 weeks before that cake knife gleamed in Ella's hand, I discovered their conspiracy purely by accident. Sleep had become elusive in my 3rd trimester, and the baby's midnight gymnastics routine had driven me downstairs for warm milk. That's when I heard Ella's voice drifting through the kitchen window. Sharp, urgent, calculating. "Dr. Martinez owes me after that malpractice situation I helped him avoid," she whispered into her phone, pacing the back porch like a caged predator. "Make sure the results are printed before Saturday. The timing has to be perfect. Maximum humiliation, maximum witnesses." Her laugh was ice water in my veins. I fumbled for my phone, hands trembling as I hit record. The revelation struck me like lightning. Dr. Martinez, the same physician who had treated Andrew's grandfather last year, the one whose career Ella had somehow rescued through her connections on the hospital board. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. She wasn't just planning to embarrass me, she was orchestrating a complete character assassination with professional backing. I stood frozen in my nightgown, recording every calculated word as she continued. "The document needs to look authentic. Letterhead, signature, the works. And make sure the percentages are convincing. 0% paternity match should do it." My unborn child kicked against my ribs as if sensing the danger surrounding us both. Sleep became impossible after that night. I replayed the recording obsessively, studying every inflection, every pause. Ella had mentioned payment, the usual arrangement, confirming this wasn't her first manipulation. How many other families had she destroyed with manufactured evidence? 2 mornings later, Andrew appeared in our bedroom doorway looking like death itself. His face was gray, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold the papers he clutched. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept either, and his usually perfect hair stood at odd angles. "Tell me the truth," he whispered, his voice breaking on every word. "Is this baby mine?" The papers fluttered as he extended them toward me. Official-looking documents with Dr. Martinez's signature boldly displayed across the bottom. The DNA analysis showed 0 genetic match between Andrew and our unborn child. I took the papers with steady hands, though my heart was fracturing. The forgery was impressive. Professional letterhead, complex scientific jargon, even a fake lab reference number. But I recognized the font inconsistencies, the slightly off spacing that betrayed desktop publishing rather than legitimate medical documentation. "Where did you get this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Mom found it in your medical file," Andrew lied, unable to meet my eyes. His mother had coached him well, but he couldn't hide the shame burning his cheeks. "She was trying to help organize your appointments and—" The excuse crumbled under its own weight. I set the papers on our dresser with deliberate calm. "And you believe this without question? Without asking me first?" The hurt in my voice wasn't manufactured. Despite knowing about their plan, seeing my husband's doubts still cut deep. Andrew's face crumpled. "I don't know what to believe anymore. The timing, the way you've been acting distant lately." His voice trailed off, and I realized Ella had been poisoning him against me for weeks, planting seeds of suspicion that made this moment inevitable. That afternoon I began my investigation. Dr. Martinez's office was located in a strip mall 40 minutes away, far enough from our usual medical providers to avoid detection. The receptionist, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, confirmed my suspicions without realizing it. "Oh, Mrs. Patterson," she said when I introduced myself as Ella's daughter-in-law. "Your mother-in-law mentioned you might be stopping by. Dr. Martinez is expecting you." The casual familiarity in her voice told me everything I needed to know about the frequency of Ella's visits. I didn't accuse Dr. Martinez when we met. Instead, I played the confused pregnant woman, asking gentle questions about the test results. His nervous fidgeting and inability to explain basic procedural details confirmed the documents were fabricated. When he mentioned the special arrangement with Mrs. Patterson, I knew I had him. "I understand my mother-in-law has been generous with her support," I said carefully, watching his face. His relief was palpable. He thought I was there to participate in the deception, not expose it. The negotiation was surprisingly simple. Dr. Martinez was drowning in debt from his malpractice settlements, and Ella's payments barely covered his basic expenses. When I offered double her amount, not for lies but for truth, his moral compass suddenly realigned. "I'll need documentation of the real test," I explained, "conducted properly with legitimate samples. And I'll need you to present the results publicly when the time comes." His hands shook as he signed our agreement, but greed overcame his fear of Ella's wrath. The hardest part was keeping the secret. My mother called daily, sensing something was wrong but unable to identify the source. "You sound different, honey," she worried. "Are you getting enough rest? Is Andrew taking care of you?" I deflected her concerns with practiced ease, though part of me ached to share the burden. Even Sarah, my closest friend since college, noticed the change. "You're too calm," she observed during our weekly coffee date. "Something major is happening, and you're in that scary focused mode you get before exams." She wasn't wrong, but I couldn't risk any leaks before my carefully planned revelation. The guest list became my weapon. I researched each invitation carefully, balancing Ella's supporters with neutral observers and my own allies. Andrew's colleagues from his engineering firm would provide professional credibility. Our neighbors would ensure neighborhood-wide gossip. My college friends would offer emotional support when the dust settled. Each invitation felt like placing chess pieces on the board. Mrs. Henderson, whose husband worked at the hospital where Dr. Martinez had privileges, she would recognize the implications immediately. Pastor Williams from Andrew's family church. His moral authority would crush any attempts at damage control. Even Ella's Bridge Club members, whose loyalty depended entirely on social standing rather than genuine affection. The final week before the shower, I perfected my performance. I smiled through Ella's increasingly bold comments about the baby's features. I nodded when she suggested names that honored Andrew's side of the family exclusively. I even thanked her for taking charge of the arrangements, each gracious word feeling like swallowing glass. "You're being so cooperative," Ella purred during our last planning meeting. "I was worried you might cause problems, but you're handling everything so maturely." Her confidence was absolute. She believed she had already won. Saturday morning arrived with crystalline clarity. As I dressed for my own baby shower, carefully selecting the outfit that would photograph well in the aftermath, I felt a strange peace settle over me. The lies they had manufactured were about to become the foundation of their own destruction. The recording of Ella's phone conversation sat safely in my purse, alongside Dr. Martinez's signed confession and the real DNA test results. 3 weeks of careful planning had led to this moment, and I was ready to serve justice one slice at a time. The moment arrived with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Ella rose from her chair beside the gift table, her movements deliberate and theatrical. The conversations around the room died like candles being snuffed out one by one. She smoothed her navy dress, adjusted her pearl necklace, and smiled with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. "Before we cut this beautiful cake," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of a judge delivering a verdict, "I think we need to address something that's been weighing on my heart." The folded document appeared in her manicured hands like a magic trick gone wrong, crisp white paper that seemed to glow under the afternoon light streaming through the windows. My pulse hammered against my throat, but I kept my expression neutral. This was it. 3 weeks of preparation had led to this single moment, and I was ready. "As Andrew's mother," Ella continued, her voice gaining strength with each syllable, "I have a responsibility to protect my family from deception." The word deception hung in the air like smoke, and I watched several guests lean forward unconsciously, drawn into the drama despite themselves. Andrew stood frozen beside her, his face cycling through confusion, embarrassment, and something that looked suspiciously like relief. He had been carrying this burden for days, and part of him welcomed his mother's intervention, even as another part seemed to shrink with shame. "This isn't Andrew's child," Ella declared, unfolding the document with ceremonial flourish. The paper crackled in the silence, and I heard Mrs. Henderson's sharp intake of breath from across the room. "I have medical proof right here." The gasps came in waves. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her coffee cup rattling against its saucer. Pastor Williams shifted uncomfortably, his usual composed demeanor cracking under the weight of the accusation. Even the Bridge Club ladies, usually unflappable in their social armor, exchanged horrified glances. "Look at these ultrasound features," Ella continued, now pulling out the photos I had brought to share with guests. She held them up like evidence in a courtroom, her finger pointing at my unborn child's profile. "Does that nose look like my son's? Those cheekbones? The jawline?" Her voice rose with each question, building toward her crescendo. The humiliation was designed to be complete. Guests stared not just at the photos, but at my pregnant belly, as if they could somehow verify genetic markers through my stretched skin. Mrs. Peterson actually leaned forward, squinting at my stomach with scientific intensity that made my skin crawl. Andrew's colleague from the engineering firm cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps this should be discussed privately," he suggested, but Ella waved him off with imperial dismissal. "Privacy is exactly what allowed this deception to continue," she snapped. "Andrew has been living a lie, and everyone who cares about him deserves to know the truth." I felt the collective weight of their stares, the mixture of pity, curiosity, and judgment that pressed against me like physical force. Someone, I think it was Penelope, actually reached for her phone, probably to capture this moment for posterity or social media infamy. That's when I moved. Not with anger or desperation, but with the calm precision of someone who had choreographed this moment down to the smallest detail. I stood slowly, my hand resting on my belly, and walked to the cake table with measured steps. The pink frosting roses seemed to mock the sweetness of the occasion as I picked up the silver serving knife. The guests watched in fascination, probably expecting tears, denials, or a dramatic collapse. Instead, I cut a perfect slice of cake, vanilla with strawberry filling just as Penelope had mentioned, and placed it on a delicate china plate. I took a deliberate bite, savoring the artificial sweetness while Ella waited for my breakdown. The cake tasted like victory, though I kept that thought to myself. Chewing slowly, I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable for everyone except me. "You're absolutely right, Ella," I said finally, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned room. The admission sent a ripple of shock through the gathered guests. Andrew's face went white and I saw Sarah's eyes fill with tears of sympathy. "But not in the way you think," I continued, setting down my fork with gentle precision. The addition caught everyone off guard. Ella's triumphant smile flickered with uncertainty for the first time. I turned toward the front entrance, where I knew my secret weapon waited patiently. "Dr. Martinez, would you please join us?" The name hit Ella like a physical blow. Her face transformed from victory to horror in the span of a heartbeat, the blood draining so rapidly I thought she might faint. Aria's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor in a cascade of red liquid that looked startlingly like blood. Dr. Martinez entered wearing his professional white coat, a manila folder clutched in his hands. His face was pale but determined, the look of a man who had finally chosen the right side of a moral divide. The guests turned toward him with the synchronization of a Greek chorus, their collective confusion palpable. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice shaking slightly but growing stronger with each word, "I need to make a confession. Mrs. Patterson approached me several weeks ago and paid me to falsify DNA test results." The admission hit the room like a grenade and I heard several people gasp audibly. Ella tried to speak, but only managed a strangled sound that might have been a word or simply a cry of panic. Her carefully constructed plan was collapsing in real time, and she could only watch helplessly as her weapon turned against her. "However," Dr. Martinez continued, opening his folder with professional ceremony, "I was recently contacted by someone who asked me to do something I should have done from the beginning, tell the truth." He pulled out an official-looking document, complete with laboratory seals and proper signatures. "I conducted a legitimate paternity test using proper samples and procedures," he announced, extending the paper toward Andrew, whose hands shook so violently he could barely accept it. "This child is 99.99% biologically his son." The second wave of gasps was sharper than the first, cutting through the air like broken glass. The truth hit different people at different speeds. I watched understanding dawn across faces like sunrise breaking over a landscape. Pastor William's eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. Mrs. Henderson's mouth fell open in perfect shock. Ella collapsed into her chair as if her strings had been cut, the fake DNA results fluttering from her nerveless fingers to the floor. Arya stood frozen beside the broken wine glass, her face a mask of disbelief and growing panic. Andrew stared at the real test results, his eyes moving back and forth across the page as if the numbers might change if he looked hard enough. When he finally raised his head to look at me, his face was a battlefield of emotions. Relief, shame, confusion, and something that might have been admiration. I took another bite of cake, savoring both the sweetness and the silence that followed Dr. Martinez's revelation. The pink frosting tasted like justice served at exactly the right temperature. The silence that followed Dr. Martinez's revelation stretched like a taut wire about to snap. Andrew's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his face cycling through emotions faster than I could catalog them. The real DNA results trembled in his hands like autumn leaves in a storm. I didn't know what to believe, he finally stammered, his voice cracking on every syllable. They said the test was legitimate. They showed me documentation, medical terminology I didn't understand. His eyes darted between me and his mother, searching for forgiveness from one and explanation from the other. I raised my hand, cutting through his rambling apology with surgical precision. The gesture commanded instant silence, even from the guests who had been whispering among themselves like a disturbed flock of birds. I know exactly what they showed you, Andrew, I said, my voice carrying the weight of 3 weeks' worth of suppressed fury. That's precisely why I waited. So everyone else could see their deception too. My words hung in the air like smoke from a controlled burn, spreading slowly but inevitably through the room. Ella sat motionless in her chair, her face wearing the blank expression of someone whose entire world had just imploded. The carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the gray pallor creeping across her skin, or the way her hands shook as reality settled over her like a burial shroud. But Arya wasn't ready to surrender. She launched herself forward with the desperation of a cornered animal, her manicured finger pointing accusingly at Dr. Martinez. She bribed him, she screamed, her voice shrill enough to make several guests wince. Can't you see what's happening here? She paid him to lie. The accusation might have landed differently in another context, but the crowd had witnessed too much truth in the past few minutes to be swayed by desperate deflection. Mrs. Henderson actually laughed, a short, bitter sound that cut through Arya's hysteria like a blade. The only liar in this room has been exposed, Pastor William said quietly, his moral authority settling over the gathering like a benediction. His words carried extra weight coming from someone who had known the family for decades, and I watched several of Ella's bridge club friends physically distance themselves from her chair. My mother rose from her seat, her face wet with tears I hadn't noticed her shedding. She crossed the room with purpose, wrapping her arms around me in a fierce embrace that smelled like her familiar perfume and righteous anger. I knew something was wrong, she whispered against my ear. I could feel it in my bones. The social dynamics in the room shifted like tectonic plates. Conversations that had been stilted and uncomfortable suddenly became animated as guests processed what they had witnessed. Andrew's colleagues clustered together, their professional faces unable to hide their shock at his family's behavior. The neighbors who had been studying me with suspicious curiosity now regarded Ella and Arya with open disgust. I stepped away from my mother's embrace and addressed the room with the calm authority of someone who had orchestrated this moment down to the smallest detail. This isn't just about DNA, I began, my voice carrying to every corner of the living room. This is about erasure. About a family that didn't want this baby, didn't want me, and wanted to rewrite their son's life according to their own preferences. Sarah stood up from her chair near the window, her eyes blazing with protective fury. How could you do this to someone carrying your grandchild? She demanded, directing her question at Ella like an arrow finding its target. What kind of person destroys a pregnant woman for sport? A few guests began to applaud, tentative at first, then with growing conviction. Mrs. Peterson from down the street actually started crying, her emotional response spreading through the room like a contagion of empathy. The sound of genuine support felt foreign after weeks of isolation and doubt. Ella finally found her voice, but it came out as a whisper that barely carried beyond her immediate vicinity. I was protecting my son, she said, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. I thought. I believed. You believed what you wanted to believe, I interrupted, my patience for her explanations finally exhausted. And you were willing to destroy lives to make that belief reality. Andrew stood frozen in the center of the chaos, still clutching the real test results like a life preserver. When he finally looked at me, his eyes held a mixture of shame, gratitude, and something that might have been respect. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, understanding instinctively that words would only make things worse. The party dissolved with the efficiency of salt and water. Guests gathered their purses and made their excuses, most avoiding eye contact with Ella and Arya entirely. Dr. Martinez slipped out quietly, his professional obligation fulfilled and his conscience finally clear. Within 20 minutes, the room that had been filled with laughter and conversation stood nearly empty. Andrew moved like a sleepwalker, collecting my coat from the bedroom and my purse from the kitchen counter. He didn't speak, didn't try to explain or apologize further. He simply picked up my overnight bag, the one I had packed that morning with quiet confidence, and followed me toward the front door. Where are you going? Ella called out, her voice breaking on the last word. But neither Andrew nor I turned around. Some bridges, once burned, leave nothing but ash behind. The drive home passed in complete silence. Andrew gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles while I stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar neighborhoods scroll past like scenes from someone else's life. The weight of vindication felt heavier than I had expected. Satisfaction mixed with exhaustion and the strange emptiness that follows a perfectly executed plan. That night, Andrew made his bed on our living room couch without being asked. I heard him moving around in the darkness, adjusting pillows and settling into what would become his sleeping arrangement for the next 5 months. The gesture spoke louder than any apology could have, acknowledgement of betrayal, acceptance of consequences, and the beginning of whatever came next. The house phone started ringing the next morning and didn't stop for 3 days. Ella's desperate attempts to reach us went unanswered, her voicemails growing increasingly frantic as the reality of her social exile became clear. Arya tried texting, then calling from different numbers, each message more pathetic than the last. 2 weeks later, I watched from my kitchen window as Ella's car pulled into our driveway. She sat behind the wheel for 10 minutes, gathering courage that never came. The bouquet of yellow roses on her passenger seat remained untouched as she finally drove away, understanding that some doors once closed never open again. Watching Ella drive away that morning marked the beginning of their social death. The yellow roses she left behind wilted on her passenger seat, visible through the windshield like a funeral arrangement for her own reputation. Within hours, the story had spread through our neighborhood with the efficiency of wildfire in drought season. Mrs. Henderson was the first messenger, appearing at my doorstep that afternoon with a casserole and eyes bright with righteous indignation. "The nerve of that woman," she declared, setting the dish on my kitchen counter with more force than necessary. "Trying to destroy a pregnant girl with lies. In my day we had words for people like that." The grocery store became a battlefield of averted gazes and whispered conversations. I watched from the produce section as Ella attempted her usual shopping routine, only to find herself isolated in every aisle. The checkout girl, normally chatty with regular customers, processed Ella's items in stone-cold silence. Even the bag boy avoided eye contact, his teenage awkwardness amplified by the social toxicity surrounding her. Sarah called me that evening, breathless with updates from her own reconnaissance mission. "I saw Arya at the post office today," she reported, her voice crackling with satisfaction. "She was mailing boxes. Big ones. I think she's already packing to leave." The confirmation arrived 3 days later when a moving truck appeared in their driveway, its presence as final as a tombstone. The neighborhood book club meetings continued without Ella for the first time in 15 years. Mrs. Peterson mentioned it casually during our fence-line conversation about garden sprinklers. "We decided to focus on authors who understand loyalty," she said pointedly, her pruning shears clicking with each word. "Ella's input is no longer welcome." Even the mailman treated their house differently. I noticed him leaving packages on their doorstep instead of ringing the bell, his usual friendly waves reserved exclusively for other residents. The silent boycott had extended to the most basic social courtesies, creating an invisible quarantine around their family. Andrew's transformation began in the kitchen at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. I found him standing at the stove, scrambling eggs with methodical precision, his hair still messy from the couch pillow. He didn't speak when I entered, just slid the plate across the counter and retreated to fold his blankets with military neatness. The doctor's appointments became his pilgrimage route. He appeared in the waiting room 20 minutes early for every visit, armed with notebooks full of questions he had researched online. During one ultrasound session, I caught him wiping tears when the technician pointed out our baby's perfectly formed fingers. His emotion was raw, unguarded. The grief of a man who had almost lost everything through his own weakness. His acts of service arrived without announcement or expectation. Fresh flowers appeared on the kitchen table every Thursday. My car's gas tank stayed mysteriously full. The baby's nursery transformed room by room as he painted walls, assembled furniture and installed safety features with obsessive attention to detail. Some days I let him sleep upstairs. Others, I heard him padding back to the couch after dinner, understanding without being told that forgiveness couldn't be rushed or demanded. His acceptance of these boundaries spoke louder than any apology could have. The letters from Ella began arriving with predictable regularity, every Tuesday morning like clockwork. Each envelope bore her careful handwriting, sometimes accompanied by small gifts wrapped in tissue paper. Baby booties. A silver rattle. A delicate blanket embroidered with our family name. I developed a ritual around her correspondence. The letters went directly into a manila drawer labeled Evidence without being opened. The gifts found their way to a charity donation box I kept specifically for her peace offerings. Reading her words would have required emotional energy I refused to invest in her redemption. My mother visited one afternoon and noticed the accumulating pile. "Aren't you curious what she's saying?" she asked, fingering one particularly thick envelope with obvious interest. "I know exactly what she's saying," I replied, sliding the drawer closed with finality. "The same thing every guilty person says when the consequences arrive. That she's sorry, that she was protecting her family, that she never meant for things to go this far." My mother nodded, understanding that some bridges burned too completely for repair. Aria's departure happened with the stealth of a guilty conscience. No goodbye parties, no farewell dinners with neighbors. Just the gradual emptying of her apartment and the eventual appearance of a "for rent" sign in her window. Mrs. Henderson reported seeing her loading boxes into a rental car at dawn, her usual designer clothes replaced by worn jeans and a baseball cap pulled low over her eyes. The silence from that side of the family became its own form of communication. No more holiday invitations, no more casual drop-ins, no more attempts to insert themselves into our lives. Their absence created space for my own family to breathe and grow without the toxic undercurrent that had poisoned every gathering for years. My baby arrived on a crisp October morning, his entrance into the world marked by the complete silence of Andrew's family. No congratulatory flowers, no excited phone calls, no requests to visit the hospital. The absence felt cleaner than any forced reconciliation could have. That first night home, I sat in the nursery rocking chair with my son pressed against my chest, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine with instinctive trust. The room Andrew had prepared glowed softly in the lamplight, every corner filled with love that had been earned through action rather than demanded through blood relation. "You were always mine," I whispered against his downy hair, inhaling the sweet newborn scent that seemed to erase every moment of doubt I had endured. "From the first flutter in my stomach to this very second, you were never in question. Not in my heart. Not in my soul." He yawned in response, his perfect lips forming a tiny circle that made my chest tight with overwhelming love. His features, the ones Ella had scrutinized and questioned, belonged entirely to our family, carrying traces of both his father and me in the delicate architecture of his face. Andrew appeared in the doorway, hesitant to intrude but drawn by the soft sound of my voice. I met his eyes across the dimly lit room and saw the question there, the hope mixed with uncertainty. For the first time in months, I nodded toward the empty chair beside me. "Come meet your son properly," I said, my voice soft enough not to wake the baby but firm enough to signal the beginning of something new. Andrew settled into the chair beside me with the careful movements of someone who understood that forgiveness was a privilege, not a right. In the soft nursery light, his face carried lines that hadn't been there 6 months ago, evidence of sleepless nights spent not just on our couch, but wrestling with the weight of his choices. Our son stirred in my arms, his tiny fist uncurling to reveal perfect miniature fingernails that caught the lamplight like tiny pearls. Andrew reached out tentatively, then pulled his hand back, still uncertain of his boundaries even in this moment of tentative reconciliation. "It's okay," I whispered, shifting slightly so he could see our baby's face more clearly. "He's yours too." The words hung between us like a bridge spanning months of separation and mistrust. Andrew's breath caught as he extended one finger, allowing our son to wrap his impossibly small hand around it with the instinctive grip that babies are born knowing. "I keep thinking about that day," Andrew said, his voice barely audible above the white noise machine humming in the corner. "The way you stood up, so calm, so sure of yourself. I've never seen strength like that before." His eyes met mine, swimming with emotion he had been too proud or too ashamed to express before. I thought about strength then, how I had discovered mine not in the moment of confrontation, but in the weeks of preparation leading up to it. The real power hadn't been in exposing Ella's lies, but in refusing to let her narrative become my reality. "Strength isn't about fighting," I said softly, adjusting our son's blanket. "Sometimes it's about knowing exactly when not to fight. Letting your enemies destroy themselves while you protect what matters." The baby shower had become a watershed moment in ways I was still discovering. People revealed their true characters under pressure, and I had catalogued every reaction with the precision of a scientist studying human behavior. Jennifer from my yoga class had been one of the worst offenders. When Ella made her accusation, Jennifer had actually nodded in agreement, her face twisting with the satisfaction of someone who had always secretly resented my happiness. She tried to call the week after our son was born, probably hoping to rehabilitate herself through association with our joy. I let her voicemail go unanswered, filing her name in my mental folder labeled Fair Weather Friends. But there had been unexpected allies too. Pastor Williams had stopped by personally to congratulate us, bringing a handmade quilt from the church ladies and a quiet apology for any member of his congregation who had doubted my character. "True faith," he said, "means believing in people's goodness until proven otherwise. Some folks forgot that lesson." Mrs. Peterson surprised me most of all. The elderly neighbor I had always considered judgmental appeared at my door 3 weeks after the shower with a casserole and a fierce declaration, "Any woman who can handle herself like you did has my respect. That mother-in-law of yours got exactly what she deserved." The lesson crystallized slowly, like sugar forming perfect crystals in a solution. Power wasn't about who could scream loudest or strike hardest. It was about who could remain standing when the storm passed, and more importantly who chose to use their position to protect rather than destroy. Andrew learned this the hard way. 5 months of sleeping on our couch, 5 months of earning trust through actions instead of demanding it through explanations, had taught him that some betrayals cut deeper than others. The doubt he had shown, not just in me but in our unborn child, had carved a scar that would never fully heal. "I don't know if I can ever deserve this," he said now, watching our son's chest rise and fall with the steady rhythm of new life. The admission was raw, honest, carrying none of the defensive justification that had characterized his early attempts at reconciliation. "That's not your decision to make," I replied, the words carrying more weight than their simple construction suggested. "Deserving isn't something you calculate or earn through suffering. It's something I choose to give or withhold." The power dynamic had shifted permanently and we both understood it. He nodded silently, accepting the new terms of our relationship with the humility of someone who had learned the cost of taking love for granted. This wasn't the marriage we had started with, built on easy affection and unquestioned trust. This was something harder one and potentially more durable, forged in the fire of betrayal and reconstruction. Ella's absence had become its own presence in our lives. Her letters stopped arriving sometime around our son's 2nd month, though I never paid close enough attention to note the exact date. The silence felt clean, like a wound finally healing without infection. I didn't wonder what she was thinking or feeling because frankly it no longer mattered. The manila drawer full of unopened letters served as a monument to her desperation and my indifference. Sometimes Andrew glanced at it with curiosity, but he never asked about reading them. He understood that my relationship with his mother was over, not just damaged or strained, but finished with the finality of a book whose last page had been turned. 3 months after our son's birth, I opened the freezer to reorganize our increasingly chaotic collection of pumped breast milk and leftover dinners. There, in the back corner, wrapped in aluminum foil with the care of a museum artifact, sat the slice of cake from my baby shower. The pink frosting had crystallized into something that looked more like art than food, the artificial roses preserved in frozen perfection. I held the package for a long moment, remembering the taste of vanilla and strawberry on my tongue as I delivered justice with dessert fork precision. Andrew found me there, standing in the kitchen with the frozen cake slice balanced in my palm like evidence from a crime scene. "You kept it," he observed, not asking why because he already understood. "Not for sentiment," I clarified, though my voice carried a note of something that might have been fondness. "For perspective. To remember the day I learned that sometimes the sweetest victory is the one served cold." I rewrapped the cake and returned it to its place of honor in the freezer, beside the breast milk and the practical frozen vegetables of our new life. It would stay there indefinitely, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that strength comes in many flavors, and sometimes the most satisfying ones are the ones you serve yourself. If this story of quiet justice had you holding your breath, press that like button right now. My favorite part was when she calmly cut that cake slice, knowing exactly what truth was coming. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.